Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the final day of the JCC of Metro Detroit's 69th Annual Detroit Jewish Book Fair, the oldest and largest Jewish book fair in the country. My name is Brenda Brook, and I'm chair of the Book Fair Steering Committee, and it's my pleasure to welcome you on this Wednesday morning to Man of My Time by Dalia Sofer. The goal of the Detroit Jewish Book Fair is to bring the best new Jewish books and authors from around the world to Metro Detroit. And this year, the rooms we're all sitting in may be different, but that goal remains the same. And even though this is our final day, you can still learn about ways to support Book Fair, watch the events you may have missed, and access our online store, where you can find Man of My Time and plenty of other hand-selected books and gifts. Visit our website at culturalarts.jccdet.org book fair. This year, in order to provide as much programming to the community as possible, we've made all of our events free of charge. So if you enjoy this event and other Book Fair events, please consider becoming a patron or donating to Book Fair. It's still not too late. And you can do this by visiting our website, culturalarts.jccdet.org/book fair. We rely on community support to make this annual event possible. So we thank you in advance for becoming part of our family. The Book Fair team would like to thank today's major day sponsor, Andy and Larry Wolf, for their continued support. We have a very special event for you this morning, and we want you to be a part of it. You can ask questions and offer comments in the YouTube comment section, or by texting to the number in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Our speakers have a great discussion prepared, and they'll take as many of your questions as possible. I am so sorry for that. While you're here at the new YouTube channel, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the reminder bell, and that way you'll never miss any of our exciting events. The focus of today's event is Man of My Time, and we have with us the author of the book, Dalia Sofer, as well as Ileene Smith, who will moderate the discussion. Man of My Time is set in Iran and New York City and tells the story of Hamid Mosafarian, who is as alienated from himself as he is from the world around him. After decades of ambivalent work as an interrogator with the Iranian regime, Hamid travels on a diplomatic mission to New York. He encounters his estranged family and retrieves the ash of his father, whose dying wish was to be buried in Iran. Politically complex and emotionally compelling, this story explores variations of loss, of people, of places, of ideals, of time, and of self. The author of Man of My Time, Dalia Sofer, is the best-selling author of The Septembers of Shiraz, winner of the Penn Robert Bingham Prize, and a finalist for the National Jewish Book Award. Her work has appeared in the New York Times Book Review, The Believer, the Los Angeles Review of Books, and elsewhere. She was born in Tehran and moved to the United States with her family as a child. Our moderator, Ileene Smith, is Vice President and Executive Editor at Farrar, Straus & Giroux, and Editorial Director of Jewish Lives, a series of interpretive biographies published by Yale University Press. She's a recipient of various publishing awards, including the Penn Roger Klein Award. Please join me in welcoming Dalia Sofer and Ileene Smith.
Hello, Dalia. I'm so happy to see you. I've missed my authors so much during the pandemic. And of course, your book was originally published right at that moment when we all began to understand what we were reckoning with. I remember that you handled that with unbelievable grace, and I'm just so glad that we have this online format so that we can talk about your book. Man of My Time received 4 out of 4 starred pre-pub reviews. That's almost unheard of. It was quite remarkable. And then it went on the front page of the New York Times Review in a rave from Rebecca Mackay. and it didn't surprise me. I read this book with such excitement when it came in. I'd read The Septembers of Shiraz and wondered what Dalia had been up to these many years. It was, I think, almost a decade since your last book. What happened during those years?
Well, first of all, thank you so much. And I'm so happy to be having this conversation with you, since it really was a pleasure to work with you on this book. So
it's very kind.
Really a pleasure. What happened? I mean, a lot happened and a lot didn't happen. Some of it had to do with my state of mind after the publication of that book, of my first book. And between that book and Man of My Time, there was another book that was completed, but didn't really come together as it needed to. So it just, it was a combination of life events, state of mind, and sort of things not happening until this one came to me in 2016, and I just went with it, and it had its own flow, and here we are.
Yes, you wrote it at quite a pace. If you began in 2016, and yes, well, for most anyone, I think. I'm not a believer in books popping out like clockwork, and they take the time they take, and the range and depth of this book is so extraordinary. I would never think to second guess your schedule. Just curious about the interval.
And I would say that in that interval, some of what didn't make it ended up sort of making it in this book. So, whatever didn't end up on the page, on the published page during those 10 years did in some way make its way to this one. So.
Yes. Yeah. Your first book had a very autobiographical cast, and it seemed to turn on the story of a family that had to, in some way, have resembled yours. Mm-hmm. It was about a Jewish family. And I was wondering, since this is the Detroit Jewish Book Fair, if you might just say a word about what it meant to be a Jewish family in Iran at the time that the Shah fled and the Ayatollah came to power.
Well, I would say that in the decades preceding the revolution, the Iranian Jews were very well integrated in Iranian mainstream society, and they were holding good positions in economic life, in cultural life, in life in general. With the revolution, now, Iranian Jews did participate in the revolution, and that's something that's not very often talked about, but some of them were active in the revolution. So they had an organization that was quite active, and the Jewish hospital, the Sapir Hospital, was actually the place where a lot of the demonstrators ended up going to be treated, because the government hospitals would either turn them away or turn them in. So that hospital ended up sort of playing a major role in supporting the revolution, or at least supporting people who were being injured. They didn't take a stance. But that aside, when Khomeini came, there was a lot of anxiety about what was going to happen, and Jews did wonder if they were going to be specifically targeted. And I think this is well known that a lot of Jews, not a lot, like I think 6 of the community leaders went and met with Khomeini, and he assured them that Judaism was going to be recognized, but Zionism would not, but that Jews were going to be safe. And in large part, they have been, though they have also been targeted like everybody else. So that my first book, the protagonist is imprisoned on charges of being a Zionist spy. But I made a point to put him in a communal jail to kind of show that this wasn't a systematic Jewish persecution, all kinds of people were being persecuted for all kinds of reasons, and he was one of them. Yeah, and life did change a little bit in terms of feeling one felt oneself a little bit more marginalized. I was a child, so I wasn't completely cognizant of everything, but it did shift a little bit. And I think, most Jews ended up leaving. So the population has gone from something like 100,000 to about 8,000 or so now, which is still the largest Jewish population in the Middle East. And they are a living, sort of practicing society, from what I understand now. Yeah, I actually have a friend who lives across from a synagogue in Tehran. He has an apartment there, and he regularly sort of looks into the courtyard, and he sees Friday night services, and it is a
Really?
Yeah, it's a living community, though they do have restrictions placed on them, things like travel and holding public office of certain kinds, and so there are some restrictions.
Oh, fascinating. Dislocation plays an important role in this book. What was it like when you first came to the United States?
Gosh, it was bewildering. It was certainly a sense of displacement, for sure. Language, in terms of culture. And in language, I would say I was sort of 3 times removed, because I was in a French school, sort of continuing on my French education in Tehran. I was in a French school here. So it was sort of 3 times removed from the society at large. So there was definitely a feeling of displacement. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the brothers in this book, and really the family, is seemingly fractured by the Iranian Revolution. Hamid stays in Iran, and the rest of the family goes to New York. But in another way, it is not necessarily the revolution that fractures this family. There are all kinds of fissures and tensions and conflicts. So could you tell us a little bit about the sort of the constellation of this 4-person family?
Yeah. Even prior to the revolution, as you say, this family is sort of fragmented. So the father is a bit of a loner. He's sort of into his project. His big project is his encyclopedia, an encyclopedia of Iranian art that he's putting together. The mother is from a kind of aristocratic lineage, so she feels herself a little bit superior to her husband. And
she is a hilarious character at various points.
Her family as well sort of don't approve of the husband. And then the sons, Hamid, my protagonist, who ends up being the interrogator, is sort of, while the father is he's somebody who likes order in his life. He likes to contain chaos. He's also a little bit theatrical. He believes people should assert themselves and take center stage. Hamid is more reticent. He's kind of ambivalent as a child. So the two of them really clash along the way.
Yes.
Their personalities clash. At the same time, they're really beholden to each other. So I see them as mirroring each other, even though they get under each other's skins. And they remain kind of beholden to each other, even after Hamid, unbeknownst to the father, betrays the father, and the family ends up leaving for America, and he stays. There is this ongoing connection, mutual, that doesn't die. And all of that is revived when Hamid is back in New York and receives his father's ashes after 38 years, sort of propelled him back in time.
Yes, when I first read this book, I experienced it much more as a book about a family than I did a political novel. That said, you know, it's lost on no one that Iran is always on the verge of seems on the verge of political cataclysm. When we first sent out the galleys, there were the tensions over the killing of Major General Qasem Soleimani. Recently, there was the Iranian nuclear scientist who was assassinated. I believe Israel claimed responsibility for that. What is it like to set a novel in such a volatile, politically charged atmosphere?
Well, I mean, there's no doubt that Iran is volatile or politically volatile, but I think as I was writing the book, I wasn't so concerned with the everyday events and sort of fluctuations. I was really trying to take a wider perspective and to kind of look at the arc of Iranian history, both politically and culturally. So those kinds of everyday events didn't affect the writing of my book that much. And as you say, to me, the book is very much about a family, and it's about one man's psyche, Hamid, as he engages with the system and sort of gets more deeply entrenched in it. It's really about how, I mean, it is political in that the external events are political. There's no escaping that. But it's really about how those events then affect the individuals who are living them, and then how those individuals shape history as they make decisions and go forward. But it's really about individuals, and in this case, it's about a family, and specifically this man at the center of it.
Yes. Would you like to read a few pages?
Sure. I'll read a bit about the Father's Encyclopedia when Hamid.
Wonderful.
Okay.
One of my favorite parts of the book.
So this is a short passage. It's when Hamid has first collected his father's ashes. This is in the very beginning of the book. And he sort of has this, he starts thinking about his father. I splashed cold water on my face, my father's ashes heavy in my breast pocket. I shut my eyes and saw him drinking tea by our kitchen window and reading the paper, cover to cover, as he used to do each morning. My father was always impeccably dressed, a necktie and a suit, even on the hottest days. He had an old world air about him. He knew how deep to bow, how often to smile, when to engage and when to retreat. Doctor of art history, professor for a time at Tehran University, he was affable to all and an intimate of none. A constant melancholy, so thick it could have been rehearsed, made him seem at once fragile and impervious. The man, as I remembered him, was always alone. Later, even as he accepted a top position at the Ministry of Culture and the scaffolding of his existence shifted, his aloneness remained unbroken. His days and nights, filled now with meetings and dinners, remained a hall of mirrors he never wished to fully enter. When he came home in the evenings, he glided from the chandeliered world of ministers and artists to his hushed room, removing only his shoes and socks. At his desk, in his suit, tie, and slippers, he worked on his magnum opus, a compendium of Iranian art, pre-conquest, post-conquest, pre-modern, modern, postmodern, and whatever else there had ever been or would ever be. At dinner time, from the head of the table, he would interrogate the family on Sasanian glass, Samarkand pottery, Tahmas miniatures, coffeehouse paintings. My mother disregarded him. My brother Omid and I tried to both appease and even conquer him. But as the right answer earned us no praise, the wrong answer earned us no reprimand. I'll stop there.
It's wonderful. Where did the encyclopedia come from in your imagination?
I think from this urge to contain everything in one book, in one place. And some of it was personal. It's sort of what happened to me with my second manuscript, the one that didn't see the light of day. It was that it was sort of going in all directions, and I couldn't stop it. I just could not stop it. It really was a hall of mirrors, and I kept feeling like I'm opening doors and endlessly, and it's this compulsion. And then I recognized it in a book that I was reading, a writer that I like very much, Danilo Kish, and his book Garden Ashes. The father there is sort of putting together. This book takes place during World War II, and the father is a Hungarian Jew who's sort of on the run. He had been a railway inspector, and so he has this idea to put together the railway timetable, but it ends up becoming this book that contains everything, all the climates, all the regions, everything, and he can't stop. And so when I saw that, I really just felt a connection with that. And I thought, I love this idea of this encyclopedia and this desire to put everything in it. It's sort of this quest to be saved from oblivion. And it's a quest for immortality in a way, and to just save everything, but it's impossible. So it's a kind of madness, and I was very drawn to that.
Yes, well, you're more self-aware than many writers in your understanding of the connection between writing and madness.
Took me 10 years.
Yes, there are many literary references in the book, and there's also a wonderful sense of the history and art. Does that correspond to your formal education at all?
To my what, foreign, you said?
Formal education.
Yes, I mean, probably, although my education, my formal education, as you say, has been very fragmented, like everything else in my life. So it's been sort of the French lineage on one hand, and then eventually American as I went to university, and then Iranian, both by birth and also just trying to reconnect with that heritage. So, and I guess there are a lot of references to different cultures too in the book. That's just because, you know, it's again, this madness. It's the madness of how I've grown up, and, you know, this mixture of everything. But yeah, I would say that it is in some ways.
I noticed that glass plays an important. It's a kind of through line in the book. There are lots of really fascinating references to glass, and I guess Hamid plays with sulfide marbles, and he's very fascinated by them when he's a little boy. His girlfriend's family owns a mirror shop. There are a number of utterly remarkable references that sort of resonate with one another in the book. Can you talk about how you arrived at that?
Yeah, it wasn't a conscious decision, but I think I was drawn to glass, and then I thought about it in retrospect. I think glass, there's the transparency of glass, this kind of clarity on the one hand, and then there is a sort of reflection and refraction of light. It kind of changes how you perceive the world. Glass allows you to see the world in different ways. And also it's very fragile, and there's something very delicate about it. So it's very transient. It can break any moment. And I think Hamid is drawn to that. I remember reading something. There was a show a couple of years ago of the artist I may have even mentioned it to you at the time, Siah Armajani, the Iranian artist. And he had a few lines about glass that really stuck with me, and I'm going to paraphrase that. I don't remember them exactly, but it was something like, glass doesn't have a self. Glass is for the other. So the emptiness of glass is like the emptiness of a jar before something is put in it. And so I think that emptiness is something that Hamid is drawn to. He identifies with it. It's sort of beautiful too. So I think I was also personally very drawn to that. And then the mirrors, of course. Yeah, there are a lot of mirrors. And I think mirrors are, of course, tools of self-knowledge because they reflect us, but also tools of deception because they can distort us. So we see in them what we want. And they're these sort of placeless places, that we have an illusion of something that doesn't exist. So all of which to sort of reflect the ways that we see or delude ourselves, throughout life and in society. Yeah.
So there's an interesting relationship between glass, which is clarity, and for the other, and the mirror, which distorts. Yes. I mean, a mirror is also glass, but it has this other quality of throwing the self back on oneself.
Yeah.
Yes. There was something I thought you might read about glass.
It's the passage. So it's actually a passage from his childhood, Hamid's childhood, and he's sort of talking about his love for glass. From my earliest years, I was in love with glass. I had a collection of 19th century sulfide marbles, transparent globes with porcelain figures inside. My father would help me send for them from Germany through one of his art magazines. My favorite marble, the one that contained a milky snow owl, was, according to my perfectionist father, faulty, because the owl was cracked. This defect didn't bother me. It only made me love that marble more. When one afternoon after school the marble went missing, I searched frantically, first in the vicinity of the crystal ashtray on the coffee table where I had left it, then inside drawers and under furniture and even behind the toilet where I discovered a ladybug dying. At the dinner table that evening, my father confessed that having found the marble in the crease of the sofa the previous night, he had thrown it out. The thing was broken, he said, serving me a second helping of the eggplant stew that I had eaten under duress the first time around. I shook my head no, but my voice wouldn't come. The memory of my chipped snow owl, now gone, made me cry with an intensity that embarrassed me. My father reached over his plate and handed me his monogrammed handkerchief. He promised to order more marbles from the magazine. Remember, dear boy, harmony, he said afterward. Without it, things collapse. He explained that to make those sulfide marbles, a glass blower would heat the tiny figure at the same temperature as the molten glass globe that would encase it. Even the slightest difference in temperature would cause either the marble to shatter or the figurine to crack. I longed for harmony, but I didn't believe in it. The world had presented me with too much incongruity. My father, the hermetic scholar, versus my mother, the unfulfilled socialite. My devotion to a prayer stone my Uncle Majid had given me shortly before he died in a car accident, versus the stone's complete indifference to me. The uninterrupted presence in my mind of the vanished Uncle Majid, of whom I remembered only his knowing smile and his black bowler hat, and the fact that pleasant things like the smell of burnt sugar sometimes made me cry. In glass, I found my own deliverance. I saved used bottles and arranged them like soldiers on the bathroom windowsill, where they would catch the afternoon light and refract it back on the floor as dancing shadows. That they had once contained such remedies as pennyroyal and rosewater and marjoram pacified me. The bottles, I believed, protected me from the world. I loved glass because it didn't want to be defined. Was it solid molten earth or a liquid that moved so slowly that it seemed not to move at all, like the earth itself? I loved it too, because through it I learned to see, the world appearing to me not as a smooth continuum, but as a series of erratic shapes, reflected and refracted, changing color according to the time of day or the light in the sky. And I knew besides the heartbreak everyone experienced at the sound of shattering glass. A chipped pitcher, a splintered breakfast bowl, a shattered mirror, no other broken thing triggered such sorrow.
Gorgeous, gorgeous. Hamid's uncle, who is mentioned in that passage, he seems a character of pure goodness. Tell us a little bit about him.
Yeah, so he's a gardener, and he's sort of not preoccupied with material things like everyone else in the book, or most people in the book. I would say he's one of the only good, pure characters in the book, other than the artist who's persecuted, H, and Hamid's daughter, Gulnaz. But yeah, there was something about him that I wanted to sort of keep a contrast. This person who's trying to live good, pure life, but can't because, with the gardening, he can't make enough money. He has to ask Hamid's father for money because he's not willing to compromise. He won't work for, the father who's in the Ministry of Culture offers him a job, to arrange a job in one of the national parks, but Majid refuses because he doesn't want to compromise it himself. So it's sort of a man who's trying to stay pure, but in the end he can't make it, and he doesn't. So he doesn't end well.
Less pure is Hamid himself, and a remarkably well-realized character of great complexity, and so much of the book is about his reckoning with his own character. What he does some things that are quite harsh in the context of his work during the Iranian Revolution, and yet he's deeply humanized character. Can you tell us a bit about how much you struggled with the sort of the moral dimension of his character, what the sort of moral calculus was?
Yeah. When I thought of him and when I sort of conceived him, he came to me as a sympathetic character, like the voice I was hearing. At the same time, I didn't want to whitewash him, so I knew that he had done certain things. So yeah, if anything, I struggled with how somebody who starts out so purely in life, he's a sensitive boy and he loves glass and so on, ends up doing such things. So it was sort of the opposite. And so my solution to that was to think of him as someone, and I did think of him as someone who just keeps making bad decisions, and he sort of takes one wrong turn after another. And I tried to show him as part of a larger system that envelops him. So it's not just him. It's sort of, he takes one more wrong decision, another one, and he goes deeper and deeper. And the deeper he goes, the less he's likely to extract himself. So yeah, he's a complex character in that he doesn't enter things with a malicious motive. He sort of has grand ideals and then they don't work out for him, but he keeps deluding himself, and he sort of says, well, I'm actually doing things from inside. I may help, people because I'm, within the center of power and I can release certain people. He keeps deluding himself, but it gets to a point where he just can't anymore, and he has to actually extract himself from that situation and choose a different course.
Yes, but we won't tell our audience what that course is. I mean, the fascination here is that this is such a gloss of your book. It is, a lot of times I worry about public conversation with authors because I worry about giving away the whole book. And there isn't the least possibility of that here because the book has such remarkable depth, and the experience of reading it on the page, in the sentence, is just absolutely stunning. And there are just so many worlds, sort of within worlds, expressed within your sentences. I think the reader will, whether it's a reader who's come to you for the first time with this book or who's read The Septembers of Shiraz, will just sort of revel in that experience. Where do you do your work, Dalia?
Where?
Yes.
In my apartment. Well, certainly now in my like anyone else, but even before, mostly in my apartment. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
sometimes I used to go to cafes and so on, but not so much anymore. So
yes, I often marvel at the writers who can write in cafes. I don't think I could even edit there.
I can edit. I can't write, but I can edit.
So there are one or two questions here. Let me see if I can parse them. All right, there's a character in your book, the nephew of a murdered political prisoner, who ends up writing a book as a witness to the revolution and gains fame. You are critical of him.
Well, first of all, I'll say, is that it? That's the okay. I would say, first of all, the you is Hamid, right? Hamid is critical of him because since the book is from the perspective,
his point of view. Yes.
Yeah, so I won't speak from my personal, perspective. But yes, Hamid is critical of him. And that has to do with sort of gaining some kind of fame or status in exchange for writing about something, writing about grief in this case, or trauma, or whatever it may be. So there is an exchange that happens. On the one hand, it's what writers do. It's not it can be noble, it can be, and it can be enriching for readers. But on the other hand, there is something that happens when you take an emotion and turn it into an object, which is what a book is. And that book then enters a marketplace and it gets exchanged as an object. So there is some compromise in that act. And then the other criticism maybe was of certain topics that may be true, but then get exploited over and over. So it's not that they're not true, but it's a little bit like, poverty porn, where it does exist, but then there's a whole money-making machine out of telling certain stories. So it was sort of my reflection of the telling of certain events of the Islamic Revolution that have become money-generating, stories. They may be true, but at the same time, they have this value. So I was looking at that aspect.
Good answer. There's a question about the expat community in Iran, asking you to speak about that. Is there a large expat community in Iran, or was there when your family was there?
Or is the Iranian expats here? So the expat would.
The question asks about the expat community in Iran, but I'm actually quite interested in the expat community of Iranians in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, so when you say, so first expat in Iran, I'm not sure which ones we're referring to. I mean, there were a lot of foreigners in Iran, so I'm not sure but maybe that person meant what you're asking, the Iranian expats here. And yeah, I mean, there are different communities in Los Angeles, as everyone knows, called Tehrangeles. There are big communities here they all have their own culture, so the one, I won't comment, but yeah, there certainly is. And there are other ones here in the city and others, in Long Island, on Great Neck. There are different clusters, and I think each has their own culture.
You're asked, was the process of writing this novel very different from that of writing your first novel?
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think the first one was, because it was so in large part autobiographical, not entirely at all, but I kind of had that blueprint of the story and what it was going to do. I mean, and then I figured out along the way. This one was really just a work of pure invention, so it involved a lot more speculation and trying to put the pieces together. And I would say it's a more fragmented novel, like I hope not in a bad way, but in a kind of way that there are a lot of disparate voices and points of view. And so that one was probably more contained, I would say, the first one. And this one, I was juggling a lot of pieces, and it goes back in history, and it's in two places, in America and Iran, and there was a lot more juggling involved in this one.
Yes, well, I mean, that's one feels that this is it's a much more complex and ambitious book, and the different parts of the book speak to each other really beautifully. Memory plays such an interesting role in the book, and has an impact on the way it's constructed. So could you speak a little bit about how the book is constructed?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, it starts in the present, and then it keeps slipping back in time, and then it goes back to the present, slips back in time. It's kind of a vacillation, sort of back and forth. And at the end, the third part is really mostly in the present. That's sort of the narrative just propels forward from that, from the beginning of the third part till the end, although there is still memory woven in. And I think that vacillation of time, back and forth in time, that came pretty naturally And maybe that may be related to the experience of being in exile in a way, in that you're living sort of these parallel lives, and you're also, as you're living your present life, you're constantly sort of looking back and re-examining the past. So it was a natural, structure for me. It was also, the slipping back in time was also a way for me to tell the story of a nation through one man's story. So with Hamid constantly slipping back, I was able to keep going back into different parts of Iranian history and trying to weave those in as the narrative goes forward at the same time.
Yes. The way it fits together, which as an editor I had virtually nothing to do with, is so beautifully realized. I know that anyone who has in our audience who hasn't yet read the book will just love the process of understanding the connection between one piece and another. And of course, it brings us back to those mirrors. And there's a wonderful sort of sense of refraction in the book. The epigraph is from Gilgamesh.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about that work, and it also comes up in the context of the book itself. So in case our readers don't know it, what is its significance?
So the Effort of Gilgamesh, it's the oldest written story in the history of literature. It's several millennia old, and new tablets keep being discovered. And the story is sort of timeless. I won't say the whole thing, but it's about this tyrannical king who eventually finds his way. He gets a friend, he loses the friend, Enkidu. The friend dies, and he is completely shattered, Gilgamesh is, and he sort of goes on this quest for, he's grief-stricken for the loss of his friend, and then he realizes that he's going to die. So he goes on this quest for immortality, and he finds Utnapishtim, who is the precursor to Noah, the biblical Noah. And Utnapishtim tells him that he cannot have, he gives him a potion. Anyway, in the end, Gilgamesh loses the potion, and he realizes that he's going to die, but that the city is going to live, the city that he built. And it's just such a beautiful tale. I've read several translations of it. And there's something, I think maybe because it is the oldest written story that we have, and that it still resonates. There's something very beautiful about it. So I worked that into the book. And so the father has a fascination for the Effort of Gilgamesh. And that, I think that's consistent with his personality for, having the penchant for the oldest written, the oldest written story, and this quest for immortality, which he too is on, through his encyclopedia. So that resonated, and so the epigraph is sort of about how everyone's going to die, the king and the simple man.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the actual epigraph is the simple man and the ruler resemble each other. The face of the one will darken like that of the other. So very much in accordance with what you just said.
Yeah.
Last night or the night before, I was watching MSNBC, and there was a politician being interviewed, and he had about 12 copies of his book strategically placed behind him. And I knew that you wouldn't have a single copy of your book in evidence because you're so wonderfully modest. But this is the book. I wondered if you could tell us something about the jacket, because you selected the image.
Yeah. So the jacket is by an artist named Ardeshir Mohasses, and he was pretty prominent in Iran and then subsequently here after the revolution. He was an illustrator, a cartoonist, an artist, and a satirist. And so he, through his cartoons, he sort of criticized and objected to all kinds of oppression that were going on in Iranian society from the time of the Shah and then until post-revolution. And I just really took to his work. There was a retrospective of his work at the Asia Society, I think, in 2008, I think, right before or after he died. And I just really loved it. And so I was looking at his images as I was writing the book. And then when the time came for us to pick the jacket image, we talked about it, and you actually suggested this one. And then we were lucky that they allowed us to have it. So
yes, and we'll use it again on the paperback. Though the background will change, as I remember, I believe it's going to be blue.
yeah.
So here's a question. You're going to laugh at this. Terry asks, are there plans for a movie?
No, and there won't be. I learned my lesson with movies. So with the
yes. Well, you were the rare first novelist who had a major film made of her book, and I know that it is not particularly faithful to your book. Desire to protect the material is very well understood.
Yeah, and this book doesn't even lend itself really. It's so internal that I just can't. Somebody really amazing would be able to make a film, that's so internal, but I wouldn't risk it. So yeah.
Naomi Levine asks, I'm interested in your writing process. Do you outline?
No, I don't outline at all, actually. No, and sometimes that gets me into trouble. That was a big trouble with that second book. But with this one, I also didn't outline. I had more of an idea of at least a direction. I think it helps to have a direction and not be completely in the dark. But I also really believe in the process of discovery and sort of just letting one thing open onto something else to a certain extent. Again, I think it helps to have a kind of general direction.
Yes. I think writers tend to fall into two camps. Those who do outline and those who do not. This book, just by virtue of its puzzle-like nature, would have been really difficult to outline, I would think. But I guess it works for some writers. You're teaching now at CUNY. Are you enjoying that?
I am enjoying that. It's my first semester teaching there, and I kind of love it, actually. Yeah, I love seeing other people in their process and trying to help them to work it out. Yeah, and it takes me out of my own head a little bit, which is always a good thing. So thank you. I hope to continue.
And it's a rude and boorish question, but are you already at work on another book, or will you take time?
No, I am. I'm actually working on 2 projects, and at some point I will have to just choose one and stick to it. But I'm finding myself equally drawn to both, and I'm going to see which one will eventually just stick more for the, for the state that I'm in right now. But yeah, I'm involved with 2 projects.
As the editor of this book, I quite looking forward to seeing at least one of them down the line.
Such a pleasure to work with you, and you had really wonderful insight, so
that's very, very, very kind. I remember working on a number of nonfiction books around the time your novel came in, and I've always loved the balance between fiction and nonfiction. And I was so ready for a sort of original and deeply satisfying novel, and it landed. And it doesn't always happen like that. Something very dark happens to Hamid's father's encyclopedia. Fortunately, though we did publish into the pandemic, no such thing has happened to this book. It's out there, and it's really, really making its way, and so grateful for your incredible goodwill through the editorial experience, and really proud to have this novel on my list. I think maybe we have time for one more question. Do fans ever give you character ideas or plot lines that you accept, or at least that sort of enter into your creative process?
That's funny. Not really, because it's just not how it works. Something has to really come from inside to sustain you, certainly for a novel, for that duration, both in time and just pages. So it really has to come from inside. But it's fun to hear suggestions, sure.
Yes, it's a lovely thought. Well, I promise that anyone who reads Man of My Time will be sustained by it, and so grateful for the opportunity for this conversation with you, Dalia, and to have had the least involvement with your absolutely beautiful book.
I am too, and I'm grateful to have this conversation. I'm grateful for my book having found its way to you, because it's been really, really a lovely experience. So thank you.
Thank you, Dalia.
Thank you, Dalia and Ileene, both, for being with us and for introducing us to this wonderful book. Our next event is Florence Adler Swims Forever by Rachel Beanland at 1:30 today. So remember, like this video when you visit our YouTube channel, and there you can view all of the book fair events you may have missed. You can purchase Dalia's book, and you can see the remainder of today's schedule. Keep in mind that the Cultural Arts Department will be showing films over winter break, so keep an eye out for emails about those. Stay safe and happy Hanukkah.